If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel. Chapter 1: The Dawn of Learning: How Skill Acquisition Shaped Human Evolution. Part 1: The First Teachers, Stone Tools and the Birth of Knowledge. Transfer around 2.5 million years ago, something extraordinary happened in the African landscape that would forever change how knowledge moved from one mind to another. Our early ancestors, the Homo habilis, picked up stones and began to deliberately shape them into tools. This wasn't random behavior or lucky accidents. These early humans were thinking ahead, planning their actions, and creating something useful from raw materials. Making a stone tool sounds simple, but it demanded remarkable mental abilities. A toolmaker had to envision the final product before starting. They needed to understand which rocks would work and which would crumble. The process required hitting stones at precise angles with just the right force. Too hard, and the rock would shatter uselessly. Too soft, and nothing would happen. Each strike had to follow a specific sequence, building upon the previous one. These early toolmakers couldn't rely on instinct alone. Unlike birds building nests or beavers constructing dams, stone tool creation had no genetic blueprint. Every Homo habilis had to learn this skill from others. Young individuals would sit nearby, watching experienced toolmakers work. They observed how experts held the rocks, where they struck, and how they adjusted their technique when something went wrong. The learning process was slow and filled with failures. Beginners would attempt to copy what they saw, but their first efforts usually resulted in broken rocks and frustrated grunts. Success required practice, patience, and guidance from more skilled individuals. The experts began showing newcomers where to place their hands, demonstrating the proper striking motion, and even correcting mistakes. This marked humanity's first structured learning experience. Knowledge was no longer something individuals discovered through random trial and error. Instead, it became something deliberately passed from teacher to student. The experienced toolmakers became humanity's first teachers. Even though they probably never thought of themselves that way, each generation could now build upon the discoveries of the previous one. When someone figured out a better way to shape a cutting edge, that improvement could spread to others and be remembered. Failed techniques were abandoned, while successful methods survived and spread. This created a growing pool of shared knowledge that belonged to the entire group. The implications were massive. For the first time in Earth's history, a species was accumulating knowledge faster than individual lifespans. A young Homo habilis could learn in months what might have taken their ancestors years to discover through trial and error. The tools themselves became better over time as techniques improved and spread. This shift from instinctive behavior to taught skills created the foundation for everything that would follow in human learning. The patient teacher showing a struggling student how to hold a stone properly was practicing the same basic educational principle that would eventually lead to schools, universities, and the structured learning systems we know today. Part 2: The Apprentice Apes, Social Learning and the Evolution of Teaching. As human brains grew larger and social groups became more complex, learning transformed from a solitary struggle into a community effort. The days when each individual had to figure everything out alone were ending. Now, young humans could watch their elders and learn from their successes and mistakes. Picture a group of early humans around 1.5 million years ago. A skilled toolmaker sits by the fire, carefully chipping away at a piece of flint. Several young group members gather around, their eyes fixed on every movement. The elder notices their attention and deliberately slows down, showing each step more clearly. When a youngster tries to copy the technique and fails, the elder gently guides their hands to the correct position. This simple scene represents a revolution in how humans learned. This new way of learning required patience from both teachers and students. Unlike other animals that mastered survival skills quickly, human children needed years of protected practice. Their parents and other adults had to feed and protect them while they slowly developed the complex abilities needed for survival. A young human might spend months just learning to hold a stone tool properly, let alone make one. The social structure of early human groups began to change around these learning relationships. Clear roles emerged between those who knew and those who were still learning. Experienced hunters would take younger group members on practice hunts, showing them how to track animals, read weather patterns, and coordinate group attacks. Skilled gatherers taught others which plants were safe to eat and where to find them during different seasons. This system created something remarkable, knowledge that improved over time. When an elder taught a skill, the student might discover a small improvement or adaptation. Over generations, these tiny innovations accumulated. Tool-making techniques became more refined, hunting strategies more sophisticated, and survival knowledge more complete. The protected learning environment meant that failure was no longer fatal. A young person could make mistakes while learning to hunt without the group starving. They could break tools while learning to make them without losing essential equipment. This safety net allowed for experimentation and gradual skill development that would have been impossible in a purely individual learning system. The cooperative nature of this learning also strengthened social bonds within groups. Teachers gained status and respect, while students developed loyalty to those who helped them. Knowledge became a shared resource that belonged to the community rather than isolated individuals. Groups that were better at teaching and learning had significant advantages over those that relied on individual discovery. This apprenticeship model set the stage for even more dramatic changes in human learning. As skills became more complex and took longer to master, human childhood itself would need to extend, creating new challenges and opportunities for our species' educational journey. Part 3. The Complexity Threshold. When skills required longer childhoods. Around 400,000 years ago, something remarkable was happening in human communities across Africa and beyond. The skills needed to survive were becoming so complex that children could no longer learn them quickly. A simple stone tool that once took weeks to master now required months or even years of practice. Hunting strategies involved coordinating multiple people, reading animal behavior, and understanding seasonal patterns. Processing plant foods demanded knowledge of which parts were edible, how to remove toxins, and when to harvest. Navigation required memorizing landmarks, star patterns, and water sources across vast territories. These increasingly difficult skills created a serious problem. Young humans needed much more time to become competent adults. Unlike other animals, whose offspring could fend for themselves relatively quickly, human children required extensive training periods. Archaeological evidence shows that during this time, human childhood began stretching longer than any other primate species. What had once been a brief learning period expanded into years of dependency and practice. This transformation forced dramatic changes in how families operated. Parents could no longer expect their children to contribute meaningfully to survival tasks at young ages. Instead, they had to invest heavily in feeding, protecting, and teaching offspring for extended periods. The burden became too much for just two parents to handle alone. Extended family members, particularly grandparents and aunts, began playing crucial roles in child-rearing. This cooperative parenting, called alloparenting, allowed communities to support multiple children through their long apprenticeships simultaneously. Brain size continued growing during this period, but larger brains came with costs. Bigger heads made childbirth more dangerous, forcing human babies to be born earlier in their development compared to other primates. This meant even longer periods of helplessness and dependency. The investment in each child became enormous, requiring years of food, protection, and constant teaching before they could contribute to group survival. The delayed reproduction that resulted from extended childhoods meant humans had fewer offspring than other species. But each child received far more intensive education. Parents postponed having additional children until older ones had mastered basic survival skills. This created a new rhythm of life where learning, rather than just surviving, became the primary activity of youth. These changes reshaped entire communities. Groups developed specialized roles for different ages, with experienced adults dedicating significant time to teaching rather than just producing food. The elderly gained new importance as repositories of knowledge and skilled instructors. Social organization evolved to support this extended learning process, creating the foundation for even more sophisticated cultural transmission. Learning had become so central to human survival that it transformed our biology, families, and societies. The stage was set for an explosion of cultural innovation that would accelerate beyond anything seen in the natural world. Part 4. The Cultural Explosion. Cumulative Knowledge and Accelerating Innovation. Around 100,000 years ago, something remarkable began happening in human communities. Skills stopped disappearing when their creators died. For the first time in Earth's history, knowledge began building upon itself in an unstoppable upward spiral. Previous generations had learned to chip stone tools and hunt animals, but each group often started from scratch. Now, children watched their parents work and improved upon what they learned. A hunter who figured out how to attach a sharp stone point to a wooden shaft didn't just keep this secret. He taught his sons, who taught their sons, who made the technique even better. This ratcheting effect changed everything. Knowledge clicked forward like a gear that couldn't turn backward. Each generation inherited the best ideas from before and added their own improvements. A simple digging stick became a hafted spear, then a throwing spear, then multiple spears used by coordinated hunting parties. Language made this acceleration possible. Instead of just watching and copying, people could explain the why behind their actions. A toolmaker could warn apprentices about stones that split poorly or describe the exact angle needed for a sharp edge. Stories shared around fires preserved crucial information about distant water sources and seasonal animal movements. Symbols and rituals created shared meaning across entire communities. Cave paintings weren't just decoration. They were instruction manuals showing hunting techniques and animal behavior. Ceremonial gatherings allowed master craftspeople to demonstrate skills to large groups simultaneously, spreading knowledge faster than ever before. Each innovation triggered cascading changes. Better spears meant hunters could target larger, more dangerous animals. Successful hunts required more complex cooperation and planning. Groups developed specialized roles. Some became expert trackers, others master toolmakers, still others skilled at processing hides into clothing. The clothing revolution exemplifies this snowball effect. Learning to prepare animal skins led to techniques for sewing, which enabled fitted garments, which allowed humans to survive in colder climates, which opened vast new territories for settlement. Each breakthrough made the next one possible. Social arrangements evolved to support this knowledge explosion. Communities began recognizing and protecting their most skilled members. Master toolmakers gained status and resources, encouraging specialization. Teaching became a valued activity worthy of community support. The ability to learn, refine, and systematically pass on complex skills became humanity's defining characteristic. While other animals remained bound by genetic programming, humans broke free through cultural inheritance. Knowledge accumulated across generations like compound interest, growing faster with each passing century. This cultural explosion laid the groundwork for everything that followed: settled agriculture, complex societies, and eventually formal education systems all emerged from this fundamental shift. The moment when human learning became cumulative and accelerating rather than repetitive and static. Chapter 2. The Age of Masters and Apprentices. Medieval Guilds to Industrial Revolution. Part 1. The Guild System. Structured apprenticeship transforms learning. By the 12th century, something extraordinary was happening in Europe's growing cities. Small groups of craftsmen were banding together to form guilds. These weren't just social clubs or worker groups. They were powerful organizations that completely changed how people learned skilled trades. The blacksmiths formed their own guild. So did the stonemasons who built cathedrals. Weavers had their guild. Carpenters had theirs. Each guild controlled who could practice their trade in the city. You couldn't just set up shop and start making horseshoes or weaving cloth. The guild had to approve you first. This created something remarkable for learning. If a young boy wanted to become a blacksmith, he couldn't just watch from the street and figure it out. He had to become an apprentice. This meant living in the master's house for years, starting around age 12 or 14. The apprentice's day began before dawn. He pummels the bellows to keep the forge fire hot. He organized tools. He swept the workshop. But most importantly, he watched everything the master did. How to heat iron to just the right temperature. When to strike hard and when to tap gently. How to judge if a horseshoe would fit properly. The master didn't just demonstrate once and expect the apprentice to remember. Day after day, the boy observed the same processes. Gradually, the master let him try simple tasks. Maybe holding a piece of iron steady while the master hammered. Then perhaps making nails under close supervision. This wasn't school learning with books and lectures. The apprentice was producing real goods for real customers. When he made mistakes, they cost money. When he succeeded, the workshop earned profit. The stakes were genuine. The guild system worked because it solved several problems at once. Masters got cheap labor and eventual skilled workers. Apprentices got food, shelter, and guaranteed training. The guild maintained high quality by controlling who could teach and who could practice the trade. Most importantly, the guilds preserved specialized knowledge that had taken generations to develop. A master mason knew not just how to cut stone, but which quarries produced the best material for different purposes. A weaver understood how different wool behaved in various weather conditions. This knowledge stayed within the guild, passed down through careful instruction. After several years, successful apprentices became journeymen. They could work for wages, but couldn't yet start their own shops. Only after proving their skills and often creating a masterpiece could they become masters themselves. Able to take apprentices. This system shaped entire urban economies. Guild members enjoyed high social status and political influence. They lived in the best parts of cities and often became wealthy. Learning a craft through apprenticeship offered one of the few paths for ordinary people to improve their social position. By the 14th century, guild-controlled apprenticeship had become the standard way skilled trades passed knowledge from one generation to the next across Europe. Part 2. The Apprenticeship Contract. Formalizing the learning relationship. With guild apprenticeship firmly established across European cities, the next critical step was making these learning relationships legally binding. What started as informal agreements between craftsmen gradually became detailed contracts that protected everyone involved while ensuring skills passed safely from master to student. These apprenticeship contracts were serious legal documents. Parents often signed them on behalf of their children, committing boys as young as 12 to 7-year agreements. The contracts spelled out exactly what each party owed the other. Masters promised to teach their complete craft, provide food and lodging, and treat apprentices fairly. Apprentices agreed to work hard, obey their master, and keep trade secrets. Parents usually paid the master a fee and promised their child would stay for the full term. The typical contract lasted 7 years because masters believed this gave enough time to learn complex skills properly. During the first years, apprentices mostly watched and did simple tasks like cleaning tools or fetching materials. As they proved themselves, masters gradually taught them more advanced techniques. By the final years, skilled apprentices handled nearly independent work, while masters checked their progress. These agreements addressed practical concerns that could destroy learning relationships. Contracts specified that masters must feed apprentices properly and not overwork them. They couldn't send apprentices away without serious cause. Meanwhile, apprentices who ran away faced legal consequences and lost their investment in learning. This mutual obligation created stability that informal arrangements lacked. The contracts also protected valuable craft knowledge. Apprentices swore not to share techniques with outsiders or work for competitors during their training. This secrecy clause meant masters could safely teach their most valuable skills without fear of losing competitive advantages. Trade secrets stayed within guild families for generations. Most importantly, contracts created a clear progression path. After completing apprenticeship, graduates became journeymen with defined rights to work for wages in their craft. They could travel between cities, learning variations of their trade while earning money. Eventually, they might save enough to buy their way into master status and start their own workshops. This formal system balanced power between masters and apprentices while managing risks for both sides. Masters got loyal workers who gradually became productive. Apprentices got guaranteed training and a secure future career. Parents knew their children would learn valuable skills in structured environments. The contract system worked so well that it spread beyond traditional crafts into emerging trades. As commerce expanded and cities grew, more occupations adopted apprenticeship contracts to train workers. This legal framework gave young people from ordinary families a reliable way to gain skills and improve their social standing through hard work and dedication. By the 15th century, apprenticeship contracts had become the backbone of skilled labor training across Europe, creating thousands of competent craftspeople who built the growing economy. Part 3. Learning by doing: the power of contextual skill development. This carefully designed contract system created something remarkable: a learning environment where young people gain skills through direct experience with real work. Unlike modern classrooms, where students practice on fake problems, apprentices learned by handling actual customer orders, solving genuine production challenges, and working with the materials and tools they would use for their entire careers. The magic happened in the workshop itself. When a young blacksmith apprentice watched his master forge a horseshoe, he saw not just the hammer strikes and heating process, but also how to read the horse's temperament, negotiate prices with the customer, and handle the inevitable moments when things went wrong. This was learning wrapped in the full context of professional life. Masters understood that technique was only part of the story. They taught apprentices when to bend rules, how to recover from mistakes, and which shortcuts actually saved time versus which ones compromised quality. These lessons could never be written in books because they emerged from years of responding to unique situations. A master carpenter knew that wood grain behaved differently on rainy days, that certain clients always changed their minds, and that some jobs required diplomatic skills as much as technical ones. The daily rhythm reinforced this deep learning. Apprentices started each morning by preparing tools and materials, learning to anticipate what the day's work would demand. They observed masters handle difficult customers, watched how experienced craftsmen adapted when supplies ran short, and gradually took on more complex tasks as their judgment improved. This cycle of observation, guided practice, and increasing responsibility built competence that went far beyond following instructions. What made apprenticeship particularly powerful was how it transmitted values alongside skills. Young apprentices absorbed professional pride by watching masters take personal responsibility for their work's quality. They learned business ethics by seeing how honest dealings built long-term customer relationships. The workshop became a place where technical skill, professional identity, and personal character developed together. This stood in sharp contrast to abstract instruction. When people learned skills removed from their natural context, they struggled to apply knowledge to real situations. Apprentices, however, developed the kind of flexible expertise that could handle surprises, adapt to new challenges, and improvise solutions when standard approaches failed. The apprenticeship model created craftspeople who could think on their feet because they had learned in environments where thinking on your feet was essential. They developed intuition about their craft because they had practiced in settings where that intuition would actually be used. By the time they completed their training, they possessed not just technical skills, but the wisdom to use those skills effectively in the complex, unpredictable world of actual work. This powerful learning system would soon face its greatest challenge as factories and machines began transforming how work itself was organized. Part 4. The Industrial Disruption. When factories replaced masters. The steam engines roared to life in Manchester's cotton mills, and everything changed. Where once a master weaver might have trained 3 apprentices over many years, factory owners now needed hundreds of workers immediately. The old guild system, built for small workshops and careful instruction, simply could not keep up with the massive hunger for workers that factories created. The machines themselves changed what people needed to learn. A traditional weaver had spent years mastering the subtle art of thread tension and pattern creation, but the new power looms did much of this work automatically. Factory workers needed different skills entirely. They had to learn how to feed raw materials into machines, spot problems before they caused expensive breakdowns, and keep the mechanical systems running smoothly. This shift created a strange situation. Some jobs became simpler than before, requiring only basic training to operate a machine that did most of the thinking. But other jobs became more complex, demanding knowledge of gears, belts, steam pressure, and mechanical repair that no traditional craft guild had ever taught. The guild masters watched their power crumble. Factory owners did not want to wait 7 years for an apprentice to complete traditional training. They needed workers who could start producing goods within weeks or months. The old apprenticeship contracts, with their promises of housing and gradual skill building, made little sense when workers lived in growing industrial cities and needed to earn wages immediately. Young people began leaving the workshops for factory work. The intimate relationship between master and apprentice, where knowledge passed through daily conversation and careful observation, gave way to something entirely different. Factory supervisors managed dozens of workers at once. They had little time for the patient teaching that had defined guild training. The factories exposed a fundamental problem with the old learning system. Apprenticeship worked beautifully for training small numbers of highly skilled craftspeople, but it could not scale up to teach thousands of workers the basic skills needed for industrial production. Factory owners found themselves desperate for any method that could quickly teach large groups of people how to operate machinery safely and efficiently. Workers struggled with this transition too. They had to learn not just new technical skills, but completely different ways of working. Instead of crafting individual items from start to finish, they performed repetitive tasks as part of a larger production process. The pride and identity that came from mastering a complete craft began to fade. This crisis of scale forced everyone to rethink how people learned job skills. The old model of one master teaching a few apprentices over many years would have to give way to new approaches that could educate entire populations quickly and systematically. Chapter 3. The Factory Model of Education, Standardization and Its Consequences. Part 1. Learning becomes an assembly line. The birth of mass education. By the 1800s, factory smokestacks rose across Europe and America, and a powerful new idea took hold. If machines could make products faster and better through organized systems, why not apply the same logic to teaching children? The old ways of learning seemed too slow and messy for the modern world. Business leaders and government officials looked at how factories worked. They saw workers arriving at set times, following the same steps, and producing identical items. This efficiency impressed them. They decided schools should work the same way. Instead of children learning different things at different paces like before, everyone would learn the same lessons at the same time. The new school system sorted children by age, just like factories sorted products by type. 6-year-olds went into one group, 7-year-olds into another. Each group moved through the same lessons in the same order. Teachers became like factory supervisors, making sure every child followed the same process. Bells rang to signal when one subject ended and another began, copying the factory whistle that controlled workers' days. Classroom design changed to match this factory thinking. Rows of desks faced forward toward the teacher, just like assembly line workers faced their stations. Students sat still, listened, and repeated what they heard. The goal was to produce graduates who could read basic instructions, do simple math, and most importantly, follow orders without question. This system cared more about creating obedient workers than skilled craftsmen. Unlike the old apprentice system where young people learn by doing real work, schools separated learning from actual practice. Students memorized facts from books instead of solving real problems. They took written tests instead of making useful things with their hands. The factory model spread quickly because it seemed so efficient. One teacher could handle 30 or 40 students at once. Everyone learned the same basic skills that employers wanted: reading, writing, arithmetic, and the ability to sit still for hours. Parents liked it because their children would be ready for factory jobs. But this efficiency came with costs. Children who learned differently struggled in the rigid system. Creative thinking became less important than following rules. The connection between learning and real work disappeared. School became something separate from life, a place where children prepared for the future instead of contributing to the present. This factory approach to education changed how entire societies thought about childhood and learning. Before, children gradually joined adult work as they grew up. Now they spent years in special buildings, separated from the real world, preparing for a future that looked exactly like a factory floor. As this system took hold, some people began to question whether treating education like manufacturing was really the best approach. They wondered if there might be better ways to help people learn. Part 2. The Vocational Response. Technical schools bridge theory and practice. As the factory model of education spread across nations, a growing problem emerged. Young people could read and write, but they couldn't build anything useful with their hands. They memorized facts about machines, but had never touched real tools. Employers complained that graduates arrived at work knowing theory, but lacking practical skills needed for actual jobs. Governments and business leaders recognized this gap between classroom learning and workplace needs. They began creating a different type of school alongside traditional academic institutions. These technical and vocational schools offered something the factory model couldn't provide: hands-on training in real trades. The new technical schools look different from regular classrooms. Students spent half their time in workshops filled with actual machinery, tools, and materials. They learned metalwork by heating and shaping real metal. They studied mechanics by taking apart and rebuilding engines. Construction students mixed concrete and laid bricks just like professional builders. These schools tried to recreate the best parts of the old apprentice system within a formal educational structure. Students worked on real projects that produced actual goods. They learned from master craftsmen who demonstrated techniques and corrected mistakes immediately. Unlike the abstract lessons of academic schools, every lesson had a clear practical purpose. Industry partnerships became essential to this approach. Local businesses provided equipment, materials, and sometimes even job placement for graduates. Factory owners visited schools to explain what skills they actually needed from workers. This direct connection between education and employment made learning feel relevant again. Assessment in technical schools looked nothing like traditional written exams. Students demonstrated their skills by creating finished products that met professional standards. A metalworking student might forge a perfect horseshoe. A mechanics student could repair a broken motor. Success meant producing something that worked in the real world. This parallel education track created new social tensions. Society began viewing academic learning and practical training as separate paths for different types of people. Wealthy families often steered their children toward academic schools that led to professional careers. Working-class families saw technical schools as pathways to steady employment but lower social status. The division between thinking work and doing work became more pronounced. People began believing that intellectual skills were somehow superior to manual abilities. This attitude ignored the complex problem-solving and creativity required in skilled trades. Technical education proved that combining theory with practice created more effective learning. Students retained information better when they could immediately apply it to real problems. They developed confidence and competence simultaneously. This vocational approach challenged the factory model's assumption that all learning should happen the same way. It showed that different subjects and different students might need different methods. As these technical schools gained success, educators began questioning whether the rigid, one-size-fits-all approach was truly the best way to help people master new skills and knowledge. Part 3. The Knowledge Pioneers, Piaget, Vygotsky, and the Science of Learning. As vocational schools proved their worth, a new group of thinkers began studying how learning actually worked inside the human mind. In the early 1900s, most teachers still believed their job was simply to pour knowledge into students' heads like water into empty cups. Three brilliant researchers would completely change this view. Jean Piaget, a Swiss psychologist, spent decades watching children grow and learn. He discovered something amazing. Children don't just absorb information passively. Instead, they actively build their understanding piece by piece, like constructing a house. Piaget found that children's minds work differently at different ages. A 5-year-old cannot grasp abstract math concepts, no matter how well you explain them. Their brain simply isn't ready yet. This insight shocked educators who had been forcing advanced ideas on young students. Piaget identified 4 distinct stages of mental development. Young children think very differently than teenagers, who think differently than adults. Each stage has its own way of understanding the world. This meant that effective teaching required matching lessons to students' developmental stage. You couldn't teach algebra to 6-year-olds any more than you could teach finger painting to college students and expect the same results. Around the same time, Lev Vygotsky in Russia was making his own discoveries. He found that learning happened best through social interaction, not individual study. Vygotsky noticed that children could do much harder tasks when working with someone more skilled than they could manage alone. He called this gap the zone of proximal development, the space between what you can do by yourself and what you can do with help. This idea of scaffolding became revolutionary. Like workers use scaffolding to build tall structures, learners need support from teachers, parents, or more experienced peers to reach higher levels of understanding. Once they master new skills, the scaffolding can be removed. This completely contradicted the factory model's emphasis on independent, silent work. Albert Bandura added another crucial piece to the puzzle. He proved that people learn tremendously through watching others. Children don't just learn by being told what to do, they copy what they see adults doing. Bandura's famous experiments showed that modeling and observation were far more powerful than anyone had realized. He also discovered that belief in your own ability to succeed, what he called self-efficacy, dramatically affected learning outcomes. These 3 pioneers fundamentally challenged the transmission model of education. They showed that effective learning required understanding development, providing social support, and recognizing that students actively construct their own knowledge. Learning wasn't about filling empty vessels, but about nurturing natural growth processes. Their work suggested that the factory model's rigid approach was fighting against how minds actually develop. Real mastery required flexibility, interaction, and respect for individual developmental differences. This set the stage for even more radical changes in how educators thought about human potential and growth. Part 4. The Humanistic Turn, Learning as Self-Actualization. By the 1960s, new voices began challenging the factory model from a completely different angle. These weren't just developmental psychologists studying how children think. They were humanistic thinkers who asked a more fundamental question: what does it mean to be truly human, and how does learning fit into that journey? Abraham Maslow changed everything when he proposed his hierarchy of needs. He argued that people couldn't focus on learning advanced skills if they were hungry, scared, or felt unloved. A student worried about basic survival simply couldn't engage with complex mathematics or creative writing. This seemed obvious, yet schools routinely ignored it. Maslow showed that real learning required meeting basic physical needs first, then safety, then belonging, before anyone could pursue higher goals like creativity or problem-solving. Carl Rogers took this further. He believed every person had an innate drive toward growth and self-improvement. But this natural learning instinct only flourished in environments where people felt genuinely accepted and valued. Rogers watched students shut down when teachers criticized or controlled them harshly. He saw them come alive when treated with respect and given choices about their own learning paths. This led to revolutionary classroom experiments. Instead of teachers standing at the front delivering lectures, some educators began creating circles where students discussed ideas freely. Instead of standardized assignments, they offered choices and encouraged students to pursue topics that genuinely interested them. Instead of grades as punishments or rewards, they used reflection and self-assessment to help learners understand their own progress. The humanistic approach emphasized intrinsic motivation, the idea that people learn best when driven by genuine curiosity rather than external pressures. A student studying biology because they loved animals learned differently than one cramming for a test. The first student remembered more, made creative connections, and developed lasting passion for the subject. The second often forgot everything after the exam. This perspective completely flipped traditional education assumptions. Rather than shaping students to fit predetermined molds, humanistic educators asked how schools could support each person's unique growth journey. They focused on the whole person: emotions, creativity, relationships, and personal meaning, not just academic performance. Adult education programs embrace these principles enthusiastically. Professional development workshops began incorporating reflection time, peer discussion, and individual goal setting. Counseling programs used humanistic principles to help people overcome learning blocks and discover their authentic interests. The factory model had treated students like products on an assembly line. The humanistic movement insisted they were individuals on personal journeys of discovery. This wasn't just philosophy. It was a practical approach that recognized learning as deeply connected to identity, purpose, and psychological well-being. This foundation would prove essential as educators faced new challenges in an increasingly complex and rapidly changing world. Chapter 4: The Neuroscience Revolution, Discovering How the Brain Masters Skills. Part 1. Unveiling Neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to rewire itself. Scientists once believed the adult brain was like a finished sculpture, hard, unchangeable, and set in stone forever. They thought intelligence was fixed at birth, and that learning new skills became nearly impossible after childhood. This view dominated medicine and education for decades, making people believe their mental abilities could never improve past a certain age. Then researchers started making shocking discoveries that changed everything. They found that the human brain acts more like soft clay that never truly hardens. Every time we learn something new, practice a skill, or face a challenge, our brain physically rebuilds itself. Scientists gave this amazing ability a name: neuroplasticity. When you practice playing piano, solving math problems, or learning a language, your brain creates new connections between nerve cells. These connections form pathways that carry information faster and more efficiently. The more you practice, the stronger these pathways become. It's like walking through a forest. The first time you push through bushes and brambles, but each time you walk the same route, the path becomes clearer and easier to follow. The brain also grows new nerve cells throughout your entire life. Areas that get used frequently become larger and more powerful. London taxi drivers, who must memorize thousands of street routes, actually develop bigger memory centers in their brains. Musicians who play instruments for years show enlarged areas that control finger movement and hearing. The most exciting discovery came when scientists realized that using multiple senses together makes learning incredibly powerful. When you see, hear, touch, and move while learning something new, your brain builds connections between all these different areas. A child learning to read benefits more from tracing letters with their finger while saying the sounds out loud than from just looking at words on a page. Physical movement especially supercharges learning. When students walk while memorizing facts or use hand gestures while solving problems, their brains create stronger, more lasting memories. The ancient connection between body and mind that helped our ancestors survive now helps modern humans master complex skills. This knowledge completely destroys the old idea that people are either smart or not smart. Instead, it shows that anyone can improve their abilities through focused effort and practice. A 60-year-old can learn computer programming. A struggling student can become excellent at mathematics. The brain's ability to change means that with the right approach, sustained effort, and patience, people can literally rewire themselves for success. These discoveries opened the door to understanding how expertise truly develops, showing that the journey from beginner to master follows predictable stages that anyone can navigate. Part 2. The Stages of Mastery, from Novice to Expert. Science discovered something remarkable when researchers studied people learning new skills. The brain follows a clear pattern as it moves from confusion to mastery. This journey happens in 5 stages that every human experiences, whether learning to drive a car, play violin, or write computer code. A novice starts with nothing. They need simple rules and step-by-step instructions. When someone first learns to cook, they follow recipes exactly. They measure every ingredient precisely and set timers for everything. They cannot tell if the pasta looks ready just by looking. They rely completely on the recipe because their brain has not built the patterns to recognize what good cooking looks like. The advanced beginner stage comes next. After some practice, people start noticing more details. The new cook begins to see when onions look properly browned or when bread smells done. They still follow recipes but can make small adjustments. Their brain starts connecting different pieces of information together. Competent learners enter the 3rd stage when they can plan their own approach. They understand the goal and can choose which method to use. The cook now knows whether to bake, fry, or steam different foods. They feel responsible for the results because they made the decisions. This emotional connection speeds up learning dramatically. Proficient learners reach the 4th stage when they stop thinking through every step. Patterns become obvious to them. An experienced cook walks into a kitchen and immediately knows what needs doing first. They see the whole situation at once, instead of focusing on individual tasks. Their brain processes information so quickly it feels automatic. Experts operate in the 5th stage through pure intuition. They respond to situations without conscious analysis. Master chefs create dishes by feel, adjusting seasoning by instinct. They recognize thousands of subtle patterns their brain learned over years of practice. What looks like magic to others is actually pattern recognition happening faster than conscious thought. Each stage requires different types of learning support. Beginners need clear rules and patient guidance. Advanced learners benefit from examples and practice opportunities. Competent students need chances to make decisions and learn from mistakes. Proficient learners grow through exposure to complex, varied situations. Understanding these stages changes how people approach learning. Instead of getting frustrated with slow progress, learners can recognize which stage they occupy and what comes next. Teachers can adjust their methods based on where students sit in the journey. Parents can set realistic expectations for children developing new abilities. This knowledge transforms learning from mystery into science. The progression from novice to expert follows biological laws, as predictable as muscle growth or bone healing. Recognizing these patterns helps anyone design better practice sessions and creates more effective ways to guide others through their learning journeys. Part 3. Deliberate Practice: The Science of Expertise. Scientific research revealed something shocking about how people become truly great at anything. For decades, everyone thought exceptional performance came from natural talent or simply putting in time. Then Anders Ericsson studied violinists, chess masters, and athletes to find the real secret. Ericsson discovered that experts don't just practice more, they practice differently. He called this method deliberate practice, and it explains why some people advance rapidly while others stay stuck despite years of effort. The difference lies in how practice sessions are structured and what the person focuses on during those sessions. Deliberate practice has 4 essential parts. First, it targets specific weaknesses rather than strengthening what someone already does well. A pianist might spend entire sessions working on one difficult passage instead of playing favorite pieces. Second, it requires complete concentration at the edge of current ability. This feels mentally exhausting, like lifting weights that challenge muscles to their limit. Third, deliberate practice demands immediate feedback to correct mistakes before they become habits. Fourth, it involves clear goals for each session. Instead of practice piano for an hour, a deliberate practitioner thinks improve the tempo in measures 12 to 16 without losing accuracy. This approach differs completely from casual practice. Most people repeat what feels comfortable and avoid challenging parts. They practice in a relaxed state, sometimes while watching TV or chatting. This maintains current skill levels but creates little improvement. It's like walking the same easy path every day instead of climbing progressively steeper hills. Deliberate practice explains why the famous 10,000-hour rule misleads people. Simply spending 10,000 hours doing something doesn't guarantee expertise. Those hours must be spent in focused, challenging practice with expert guidance. A weekend golfer might play for decades without improving because they repeat the same swing errors. Meanwhile, someone practicing deliberately could reach higher performance in far fewer hours. This principle applies across domains. Writers improve by tackling difficult techniques and seeking critical feedback, not by writing comfortable stories. Programmers advance by solving increasingly complex problems and studying others' superior code. Medical students become skilled doctors through challenging cases with experienced mentors, not just reading textbooks. The process feels uncomfortable because the brain works hard to form new neural pathways. People often mistake this discomfort for lack of talent. Actually, the struggle indicates learning is happening. Comfort during practice usually means the brain isn't being challenged enough to change. Understanding deliberate practice transforms how people approach skill development. Instead of hoping talent will emerge through repetition, learners can design practice sessions that systematically address weaknesses. They can seek feedback sources and create measurable goals for improvement. This knowledge also explains why expert performance seems effortless. Years of deliberate practice create smooth, automatic responses through physical changes in brain structure. The next piece of this puzzle involves understanding exactly how repeated practice transforms neural circuits into efficient pathways that make expertise feel natural. Part 4. Myelination and Mastery, the physical transformation of expertise. When you practice a skill repeatedly, something remarkable happens inside your brain at the microscopic level. Each time you activate the same neural circuits, your brain starts building a protective coating around the nerve fibers that carry signals between brain cells. This coating, called myelin, acts like insulation around an electrical wire, making signals travel faster and more efficiently. Think of myelin as nature's way of creating express lanes in your brain. When you first learn to play piano, the neural signals between your brain and fingers travel slowly along uncoded pathways. But as you practice scales day after day, your brain wraps these frequently used circuits in layers of myelin. The more you practice, the thicker this coating becomes. This process explains why skilled pianists can play complex pieces without thinking about each finger movement. Their brain has built superhighways that allow musical information to flow at lightning speed. The same thing happens when a basketball player makes free throws or when a surgeon performs delicate operations. Years of practice create these high-speed neural pathways. Myelin formation explains the mysterious feeling we call muscle memory. Your muscles don't actually remember anything, but the myelinated circuits in your brain fire so quickly and smoothly that movements feel automatic. A tennis player doesn't consciously think about their serve technique during a match because their brain circuits have become so efficient through myelination. The timing of practice matters enormously for myelin development. Young brains build myelin more easily, which is why children often pick up new skills faster than adults. But adult brains continue making myelin throughout life, especially when practice is consistent and focused. Quality trumps quantity in myelin formation. 20 minutes of concentrated, challenging practice builds more myelin than 2 hours of mindless repetition. This is why focused practice sessions work better than marathon training days. The brain needs specific, repeated activation of the same circuits to trigger myelin production. Here's the catch about these neural superhighways: use them or lose them. When circuits aren't activated regularly, the brain actually removes unused myelin through a process called pruning. This explains why skills deteriorate without practice and why returning to an old hobby feels rusty at first. Understanding myelination changes how smart learners approach practice. Instead of hoping for sudden breakthroughs, they commit to regular focus sessions that steadily build these neural pathways. They know that each practice session literally changes their brain structure, creating faster and more reliable performance. This knowledge also explains why cramming doesn't work for skill development. Myelination requires time and repeated activation. You can't build these neural superhighways overnight, any more than you can build physical muscles in a single workout session. The next step in understanding expertise involves examining how the brain organizes information into meaningful patterns and chunks, allowing experts to process complex situations with remarkable speed and accuracy. Chapter 5. The Digital Transformation, Learning in the Age of AI and Networks. Part 1. The Situated Learning Revolution. Context returns to education. Something remarkable is happening in workplaces around the world. After centuries of separating learning from doing, we are returning to an ancient truth. The best way to learn something is to do it in the real place where it actually matters. Companies today are creating learning experiences that look remarkably similar to medieval apprenticeships. Medical residents learn surgery by standing next to experienced doctors in operating rooms, not just reading about procedures in textbooks. Software engineers learn coding by working on actual projects with senior developers watching over their shoulders. Marketing interns learn campaigns by running real advertisements with real budgets and real customers. This shift happened because educators rediscovered something important. Two researchers named Jean Lave and Etienne Wenger studied how people really learn skills. They found that knowledge doesn't transfer well from classrooms to real work. Instead, people learn best when they join communities of practice where experienced workers welcome newcomers and gradually teach them through actual tasks. Think about how a new cook learns in a restaurant kitchen. They start by washing dishes and watching others work. Gradually, they help prep vegetables, then assist with simple dishes, and eventually cook full meals. At each step, they work alongside experienced chefs who show them techniques, correct mistakes, and share secrets. The learning happens naturally through real work, not through lectures about cooking theory. Digital technology has made this approach even more powerful. Modern software can embed helpful guidance directly into work tools. When someone uses a new program, tutorials pop up exactly when needed. Video games teach complex strategies through interactive practice rather than instruction manuals. Virtual reality lets medical students practice operations on digital patients before touching real ones. The key insight is that learning works best when problems, tools, and feedback are tightly connected. When someone encounters a real challenge, uses actual tools to solve it, and gets immediate feedback from people who matter, their brain creates strong memories and useful skills. This represents a dramatic shift from traditional education. Instead of learning abstract concepts in sterile classrooms, people now learn practical skills in messy, complicated environments where they will actually use those skills. The feedback is immediate and relevant. The problems are real. The tools are the same ones professionals use every day. Consider how modern coding boot camps work. Students don't just read about programming languages. They build actual websites and applications while experienced programmers guide them through challenges. When they get stuck, help comes from people who have solved similar problems. When they succeed, they have created something real that works in the world. This return to situated learning is changing how we think about expertise. Skills develop through participation in real communities, not through isolated study. The most effective learning happens when newcomers gradually become full participants by engaging with authentic tasks alongside people who already know how to do them well. Part 2. The Peer Network Explosion: How Communities Replaced Classrooms. The massive shift began quietly in computer screens across the world. Programmers started gathering in digital spaces, sharing code and solving problems together. These weren't formal classrooms with teachers and students. Instead, they were collections of people who knew different things and wanted to help each other learn. Forums like Stack Overflow became treasure troves where anyone could ask coding questions and receive answers from experienced developers. GitHub transformed into a massive workshop where programmers could see how others built software, suggest improvements, and collaborate on projects. These platforms created something remarkable: learning communities that operated around the clock, drawing expertise from every corner of the globe. The old model of sitting in classrooms listening to lectures started feeling outdated. Why memorize information when you could join a community of people actively using that knowledge? Developers found mentors in online spaces who reviewed their code line by line, explaining better approaches and catching mistakes. These relationships often grew stronger than traditional teacher-student bonds because they were built around real work and mutual respect. Social accountability became a powerful force. When someone committed to learning a new programming language in public Discord servers or Slack communities, their peers would check on their progress. Reputation systems on platforms like Reddit and specialized forums motivated people to provide helpful answers and quality content. The desire to build credibility within these communities pushed learners to deepen their understanding. Cohort-based courses emerged as structured alternatives to traditional education. Small groups of learners would progress through material together, creating tight bonds and shared accountability. Unlike massive online courses where students often felt isolated, These cohorts provided peer support and collective problem-solving. The magic happened when people realized they could join multiple communities simultaneously. A web developer might participate in JavaScript forums, design communities, startup circles, and freelancer groups. Each network provided different perspectives and opportunities. Learning paths became personal journeys through interconnected webs of expertise, rather than predetermined curricula. Open-source projects became the ultimate learning laboratories. New contributors could start with simple tasks like fixing documentation errors, gradually taking on more complex challenges as community members guided their growth. They learned by doing real work that mattered to thousands of users worldwide. Professional guilds for creators, marketers, and consultants began forming online, sharing knowledge through private communities, mastermind groups, and collaborative documents. These networks provided not just technical knowledge, but business wisdom, emotional support, and career guidance that traditional institutions rarely offered. The transformation was profound. Learning became social, immediate, and practical. Instead of waiting for scheduled classes or semester breaks, people could access expertise instantly and apply it immediately. Communities of practice emerged organically around shared interests and challenges, creating rich environments where knowledge flowed naturally between participants. This peer-driven approach was reshaping how humans acquired skills, setting the stage for even more personalized and immersive learning experiences that would soon emerge. Part 3. Multimodal Learning, Engaging All Senses for Deeper Mastery. The peer networks had created something remarkable: instant access to expertise and social learning. But as people gathered in these digital communities, a new problem emerged. Text-based forums and video calls, while powerful, still felt flat compared to real-world learning experiences. The human brain had evolved over millions of years to learn through all its senses at once. When early humans learned to make fire, they didn't just read instructions. They watched the movements, felt the friction, heard the crackle, smelled the smoke, and experienced success or failure through their whole body. Modern learning science began to rediscover this ancient truth. Researchers found that when people learned new vocabulary while making hand gestures, they remembered words far better than those who sat still. When students drew diagrams while solving math problems, their understanding deepened dramatically. The brain, it turned out, created stronger memories when multiple pathways worked together, instead of competing for attention. This insight sparked a revolution in how people designed learning experiences. Instead of choosing between reading, watching, or doing, educators started combining all three deliberately. Language learning apps began requiring users to speak, listen, read, and write simultaneously. Medical students practiced procedures in virtual reality before touching real patients. Business schools used simulations where students made decisions and saw immediate consequences unfold visually, auditorily, and through data feedback. The key breakthrough was congruence, making sure each sensory input supported the same core idea rather than pulling learners in different directions. When someone learned to repair an engine, they could watch expert mechanics on video, follow step-by-step diagrams, listen to audio explanations, and practice with virtual tools that felt realistic. Each mode reinforced the same mental model of how engines worked. Virtual and augmented reality took this concept even further. Students could walk through ancient Rome, manipulate molecular structures with their hands, or practice dangerous procedures in safe environments. These technologies created rich, immersive worlds that approximated real-world complexity without real-world risks. Flight simulators had proven this approach decades earlier. Pilots could master emergency procedures through repeated practice in realistic but safe conditions. Games became serious learning tools as well. Complex simulations taught people to manage cities, understand economics, or master scientific principles through trial and error. Players learned by doing, making mistakes, and immediately seeing results. The instant feedback loop that made games addictive also made them powerful teaching machines. The most effective multimodal experiences felt seamless. Learners barely noticed they were engaging multiple senses because everything worked together naturally. They solved problems by thinking, moving, seeing, and interacting all at once, just like humans had always learned best. This integration of senses and technologies was creating unprecedented opportunities for personalized learning, where each individual could find their optimal combination of inputs and experiences. Part 4. The Personalized Future: Intelligence Theories and Adaptive Learning. Scientists in the 1980s began to realize that people were much more different than anyone had imagined. Robert Sternberg proposed that intelligence wasn't just one thing you either had or didn't have. Instead, he said humans used 3 types of thinking. Analytical thinking helped solve problems step by step. Creative thinking generated new ideas and solutions. Practical thinking helped navigate real-world situations and work with people. This meant a person could be brilliant at one type but struggle with another. Around the same time, educators discovered that students absorbed information through different channels. Some learned best by reading and writing. Others needed to hear explanations spoken aloud. Visual learners required charts, diagrams, and images to understand concepts. Kinesthetic learners had to move, touch, and physically practice to make information stick. These discoveries shattered the old assumption that one teaching method worked for everyone. Computer programmers saw an opportunity. They began building learning systems that watched how each student responded to lessons. These adaptive programs tracked which problems students solved quickly and which ones caused confusion. If someone struggled with math word problems, the system might switch to visual representations or break concepts into smaller pieces. If a student mastered topics rapidly, the program accelerated the pace and added complexity. AI tutors emerged as sophisticated conversation partners. They analyzed not just right and wrong answers, but also patterns in mistakes, response times, and learning preferences. These digital teachers could adjust explanations instantly, provide personalized encouragement, and suggest practice exercises tailored to individual weaknesses. The most advanced systems learned alongside their students, becoming more effective with each interaction. This personalization carried both promise and danger. Data-driven learning could help every person find their optimal path to mastery. Students no longer had to suffer through mismatched teaching styles or move at inappropriate speeds. However, algorithms might accidentally reinforce biases, create filter bubbles, or invade privacy by collecting intimate details about thinking patterns. The biggest risk was overfitting, when systems became too focused on immediate preferences rather than long-term growth. A student who disliked challenging material might receive increasingly easy tasks, limiting their development. Personalization could accidentally trap learners in narrow paths instead of expanding their capabilities. The most valuable outcome wasn't just smarter software, but smarter learners. When people understood their own thinking patterns, they could deliberately choose learning strategies that matched their goals. Someone preparing for creative work might emphasize visual and kinesthetic approaches. A person entering analytical fields might focus on logical reasoning and systematic problem solving. This self-awareness transformed learning from something that happened to students into something they actively designed. People began treating their minds like gardens, carefully selecting the right conditions for different types of growth. The ancient human drive to learn was evolving into something more intentional and powerful than ever before.